Black housekeeper brings son to work. Millionaire boss insults them and regrets it. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers as the evening crowd moved through Preston Wells' mansion. Laughter rose like music from polished voices, the kind of people who believe the world belonged to them. In the corner, unnoticed except when needed, Tasha Brooks wiped a silver tray and adjusted her plain uniform. She had been in this house for 3 years, quiet, efficient, invisible. Her son, Devon, just 7 years old, peeked out from the kitchen doorway, eyes wide at the grandeur. Preston's sharp voice cut through the chatter. He spotted the boy, smirked, and let his words fall heavy enough for every guest to hear. "Careful, son. Places like this aren't for people like you. Best remember that early." The room erupted in chuckles, a cruel chorus echoing off the marble walls. Tasha froze, the sting sharper than any insult she had swallowed before. Devon lowered his head, retreating, shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of an entire verdict. Preston raised his glass, savoring his dominance. To him, it was just another evening, another reminder of his untouchable power. To Tasha, it was the line that could never be uncrossed again. She said nothing in that moment, only lowered her gaze and returned to her duties. But behind the silence, something shifted. A quiet decision formed, sharper than glass, stronger than steel. What Preston Wells didn't know was that the woman he had just humiliated, the one he thought beneath him, was already preparing the evidence that would bring down his empire. Tasha Brooks had not always been a cleaner in someone else's mansion. Years earlier, she had studied accounting, numbers flowing through her mind like a second language. Balance sheets, ledgers, tax filings, those were once her world. But life had not been kind. A pregnancy without support, bills that piled faster than paychecks, and a job market that closed doors the moment it saw her resume stamped with the wrong zip code. Survival meant trade-offs, and the uniform she wore now was proof of every compromise she had been forced to make. Each morning she arrived before sunrise. Each night she left long after the laughter and champagne had faded. She never complained, never raised her voice, but she remembered everything. Every sneer, every careless insult, every reminder from Preston Wells that she was not equal in his house. If Preston was fire, his sister Rebecca Lang was ice. She moved through the mansion with elegance, her words coated in silk but sharpened to wound. Rebecca would smile sweetly as she handed Tasha an empty glass and murmur, "Careful not to scratch the crystal, dear. It is worth more than your yearly salary." Guests would laugh, pretending the cruelty was a joke. Tasha only nodded and carried on, though her chest burned with humiliation. The pattern repeated endlessly, small cuts that left invisible scars. Yet Tasha endured. She told herself her son needed stability, that one day she would rise above all of it. She just needed patience. That patience cracked one evening when she lingered near the library doors, polishing the brass handles. Inside, Preston entertained 2 associates, glasses of brandy in their hands. He leaned back in a leather chair, his voice dripping with arrogance. "They think we built all 200 units, Preston bragged, swirling his drink. "In reality, we delivered barely 80. The rest of that funding went exactly where it should, into my accounts. Housing projects for the poor are a goldmine if you know how to play the system." The men chuckled, impressed. Preston went on, "And if anyone dares question it, I have a dozen technical excuses lined up. Quality over quantity, infrastructure delays, regulatory nonsense. They eat that up every time." Tasha's hand froze on the doorknob. The words pierced her like a blade. It was not just arrogance anymore. It was theft. It was betrayal against families who desperately needed homes, against people who trusted him with their futures. She moved silently down the corridor, face expressionless, but inside her mind raced. This was more than humiliation. This was evidence of something far greater, something that could ruin him if placed in the right hands. That night, after Devon had fallen asleep, she sat at the small kitchen table of her modest apartment. She opened her old notebook, the one she had carried from job to job. On the first blank page, she wrote down Preston's words exactly as she remembered them. Below it, she drew 2 columns, insults and crimes. For the first time, the balance began to shift. The insults she could endure, the crimes she would not. Tasha Brooks carried her work cart down the marble corridor, the quiet squeak of the wheels swallowed by the grandeur of the mansion. The chandeliers above glistened like frozen stars, mocking the uniform she wore. For Preston Wells, she was invisible, until he decided to make her visible in the worst possible way. At staff meetings, he often turned her into the punchline. While executives sat around the table discussing mergers, Preston would stop mid-sentence, glance at Tasha tidying the corner, and smirk. "Careful," he would say loud enough for all to hear. "Do not spill bleach on the reports. Numbers are fragile." Laughter followed. Every chuckle was a dagger. Rebecca Lang added her own brand of cruelty, smooth and elegant. At lavish parties, she would gesture toward Tasha with her glass of champagne as though presenting an exhibit. "Notice the dedication," she told a circle of guests once, her voice dripping with irony. "Some people really were born to serve." The guests chuckled politely, unsure whether to laugh or to flinch, but Rebecca's eyes dared them to challenge her. Tasha endured it in silence, but silence was not the same as submission. Every insult engraved itself into her memory. Every cruel word became fuel. Night after night, when the Wells estate grew still, she lingered longer in the offices. To the household, she was just the cleaner making sure the desks gleamed. But to herself, she was something else entirely, a woman assembling a puzzle piece by piece. She slipped a small device from her pocket and pressed record. Every whispered brag, every careless comment was captured. It was during one of those nights that she found her first thread. In Preston's office, half hidden beneath papers he left scattered, she saw a ledger that did not add up. Transfers masked as consultancy fees, accounts tucked away offshore. Her trained eye recognized the patterns immediately. She was no ordinary cleaner. Before life collapsed, she had trained as an accountant. Numbers spoke to her, and these numbers screamed fraud. Still, she knew knowledge without protection was a death sentence. That was when Daniel Ruiz entered her story. Daniel was not flashy like the people who mocked her daily. A quiet attorney with sharp instincts, he carried the weight of truth with patience. Tasha approached him discreetly, meeting him outside the estate in a modest cafe. She slid a folder across the table, her hands trembling. "I need to know if what I am seeing is real," she whispered. Daniel leafed through the copies she had risked making, his brows tightening with each page. "It is real," he said at last, "and it is dangerous." He warned her about the risks, the power Preston wielded, the network of silence that protected him. But when he looked into Tasha's eyes, he saw resolve stronger than fear. He agreed to guide her, even if it meant treading on dangerous ground. Through Daniel's cautious connections, a second ally emerged, Jason Mendez, a federal investigator known for chasing corporate crime with unshakable determination. Jason did not storm into the picture. He arrived carefully, like a shadow testing the edges of light. Daniel wanted certainty before exposing Tasha to greater danger. Only after confirming the document's authenticity did Jason agree to step closer. Together, the three formed a fragile triangle of trust. Tasha continued her double life, still wiping glasses and sweeping floors while secretly collecting fragments of Preston's empire's rot. And then came the night that changed everything. Preston was in his private study, laughing with a group of investors. Tasha was in the hall, her cart positioned as though she were waiting to tidy up after them. She pressed record again, the device hidden beneath the folded rag. His words spilled out, careless and cruel. "The city council is weak. Once we push these families out, the land value will triple. Minorities never know how to hold on to what they have anyway." The room erupted in laughter, echoing the same arrogance he displayed in every corner of his life. But this time, Tasha captured it all, proof not only of fraud, but of the racist contempt fueling his empire. She stood there, motionless, every part of her body aching to react. But she remained still, her face calm, her uniform spotless, her hand steady on the mop handle. Inside, however, a storm raged. This was more than personal humiliation. This was systemic cruelty, profit built on displacing the vulnerable, and he was proud of it. The stakes had shifted. Tasha was no longer just gathering evidence. She was fighting for something bigger. The woman Preston believed to be powerless was building the case that could bring him down. The evidence Tasha gathered was no longer just a pile of papers and recordings. It was a weapon. But weapons meant nothing unless used at the right moment, and that moment had to be planned with precision. Daniel Ruiz sat across from Jason Mendez in a dim office downtown. Files were spread across the table, every page marked, every recording catalogued. Both men knew what they had could bury Preston Wells for good, but they also knew a single misstep could destroy Tasha's life. "This has to be airtight," Daniel said quietly. Jason nodded, his jaw set. "We need the right prosecutor. Someone who will not bow to the Wells family name." That someone was Andre Bennett. Known for his unshakable pursuit of corporate fraud, Andre was the kind of man who weighed every detail before making a move. When Daniel and Jason approached him, he studied the evidence with narrowed eyes. Finally, he leaned back, his voice steady. "If this holds up in court, Preston Wells will not just lose investors. He will lose his empire." The plan was set. A sting would be executed during Preston's upcoming investor presentation, the crown jewel of his business calendar. Every major shareholder would be present. Every word Preston spoke would be recorded, and if all went well, the truth would be revealed before the very people whose money kept his empire alive. For Tasha Brooks, the thought of standing so close to him while this unfolded filled her with dread. Nights of quiet bravery felt different than the sharp spotlight of exposure. Yet when she looked at her son asleep in their small apartment, she knew there was no turning back. His future depended on her courage now. The night before the sting, Tasha stood before a cracked mirror in her modest bathroom. Her cleaning apron hung around her neck, the same one she had worn while enduring every insult and humiliation. Slowly, with trembling hands, she removed it. The gesture felt small, but in her heart it was a transformation. She was not stepping into that mansion as a servant anymore. She was stepping in as the woman who would end Preston Wells. Morning came heavy with tension. The Wells mansion buzzed with activity. Expensive cars rolled up the driveway, polished shoes clicked against marble floors, and investors filled the grand hall. They were hungry for promises of growth and profit, and Preston was ready to feed them. He stood at the head of the long table, his suit sharp, his grin wider than ever. Rebecca lounged nearby, a glass of wine in her hand, her eyes sharp with smug certainty. To her, this was routine, another performance where her brother dazzled the room with numbers and charm. Preston began his speech with the confidence of a man untouchable. He talked of expansion, of dominance in markets others feared to touch, of profits that would multiply beyond imagination. His voice carried through the room, smooth and commanding, while the investors nodded eagerly. Tasha, quietly moving along the walls with her cart, felt her pulse quicken. She was close enough to hear his every word, close enough to see Rebecca's satisfied smile. But today was different. Jason and Andre were watching from hidden vantage points. Daniel was nearby, his eyes locked on her, steadying her without a word. Preston leaned into his closing remarks, arrogance dripping from every syllable. "Gentlemen and ladies," he declared, "what you see here is a future no one else dares to build. We are not just in control, we are untouchable." The room erupted in applause. Rebecca clapped lazily, smirking as if the game had already been won. The applause had barely settled when a quiet sound broke through the room. The faint click of a microphone. Every head turned. From the far end of the hall, Tasha Brooks stepped forward, no tray in her hand, no apron around her waist. Her voice trembled at first, but it carried across the marble chamber. "There is something the investors deserve to see before they place another dollar in this company." Preston's smile faltered, but only for a moment. He laughed, dismissive, waving his hand. "Miss Brooks, this is not your place. Leave now before you embarrass yourself further." But the large screen behind him flickered. A voice filled the speakers, not Tasha's, but his own. "Minority families are nothing but numbers on a ledger. Move them out, double the profits. They do not matter." Gasps rippled through the room. Eyes snapped back to Preston, whose confident mask cracked. The next clip played, a recording of him on a late-night call. "Transfer the funds to the offshore account. By the time anyone notices, we will have doubled the return." Murmurs turned into outrage. Investors leaned forward, their faces pale, their hands gripping the table. Preston's laughter had vanished. Tasha pulled a stack of documents from her bag. Financial records, signatures, bank transfers, all copied and verified. She placed them on the polished wood with steady hands. "These are not mistakes. They are deliberate crimes. Every number here has a name. Every missing dollar came from families who trusted this company." Rebecca Lang shot up from her chair, her voice sharp. "This is a setup." "She is nothing but hired help, a bitter woman twisting words she does not understand." But Daniel Ruiz stepped forward, calm and precise. She understands perfectly. I reviewed these documents myself. They are authentic, and there is more, much more. The screen behind them flashed again, showing Preston's own signature beside false accounts. Line after line, the evidence unfolded, undeniable. The room descended into chaos, investors shouting, some rising to their feet, others glaring at Preston as if seeing him for the first time. He raised his hands, his voice desperate. "This is manipulation, a trick! None of this proves anything!" But the sound of heavy doors opening silenced him. Andre Bennett entered with a team of federal agents. Their presence was sharp, unshakable, cutting through the luxury like a blade. Andre's voice was firm, controlled, and final. "Preston Wells, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. You will come with us now." The agents closed in. Rebecca tried again, her voice breaking. "You cannot do this. He built this empire! You cannot take him away on the word of her." Andre's gaze cut to her, steady and cold. "We are not acting on her word. We are acting on the truth. The evidence speaks for itself." Preston's shoulders sagged as the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists. For the first time, his voice carried no power. He looked around the room, but there was no ally left, no investor willing to defend him. The empire he believed untouchable was collapsing in front of his eyes. Tasha did not gloat. She did not smirk or celebrate. She stood quietly, her eyes on her son in the corner of the room, watching with wide, trembling pride. This was not revenge. It was dignity. It was justice. As the agents led Preston away, the hall remained silent, except for the faint hum of the projector still running. On the screen, frozen in place, was his own face mid-speech, a monument to arrogance undone by truth. Power built on cruelty cannot last. Lies eventually collapse under their own weight. And on this day, justice finally walked into the room. The fall of Preston Wells did not end in the mansion's grand hall. By morning, his face covered every screen in the city. Headlines flashed across news tickers. CEO arrested on fraud charges. Wells' empire collapses overnight. Federal sting reveals decades of corruption. Images of federal agents carrying out boxes of files and seizing luxury cars filled the broadcasts. The marble mansion that once echoed with laughter and champagne toasts now stood silent, its gates chained, its windows dark. The empire Preston had built on greed and cruelty was dismantled piece by piece, faster than anyone thought possible. Rebecca Lang tried to salvage her image, speaking in carefully crafted statements. But the public no longer listened. Her words dissolved under the weight of undeniable evidence. 3 months passed. In that time, the impact of Preston's downfall rippled outward. Stolen federal housing funds were restored. Families who had been pushed out of their homes were welcomed back with new leases and repaired buildings. The very communities Preston had exploited stood stronger than before. A new program was announced, scholarships for underprivileged children, created in Tasha Brooks' name. The funds did not erase years of hardship, but they carved a pathway to futures once denied. For the first time, the name of a cleaner who had once been invisible was spoken with respect and gratitude. The camera shifted to a bright morning outside a newly renovated housing complex. A ribbon-cutting ceremony drew crowds of families, community leaders, and federal officials. There were no close-ups of faces, only faceless silhouettes applauding, hands clapping, and children holding balloons that bobbed in the sun. At the podium stood Malik Thompson, the newly appointed Director of Corporate Safety and Integrity. His voice carried the authority of a man determined to protect what had nearly been lost. Today is not just about rebuilt walls or restored accounts. It is about courage, the kind of courage that begins quietly, in the shadows, when no one else is watching. Tasha Brooks stood alone, yet she stood for us all. She proved that one voice, when armed with truth, can shake even the highest towers of corruption. The ribbon was cut, the crowd cheered, and the montage continued, families walking into their homes, children opening books with scholarship seals, community centers buzzing with life again. Tasha herself did not stand at the center of the cameras. She remained in the background, holding her son's hand, watching as he smiled at the children running around him. Her pride was not in public recognition, but in knowing that his future was no longer chained to her silence. The final narration unfolded as the montage slowed, each word carrying weight. Tasha Brooks was not a politician, not a billionaire, not a figure of power. She was a mother, a worker, a woman who refused to be broken. And by choosing dignity over despair, she reminded us all that truth is stronger than lies, and resilience is stronger than cruelty. The closing image showed her walking away from the ribbon cutting, sunlight stretching across the pavement, her son skipping beside her. No spotlight, no applause, only quiet strength leading into a brighter tomorrow. Tasha Brooks proved that even in the face of cruelty and corruption, resilience and truth could rewrite destiny.